Rian lived on the edge of the wide desert where the land stretched farther than the eye could see. The sand was pale under the day sun, and it turned dark gold when the sun fell. His home was small, made of stone and metal, built near the ruins of an old trade station. Most days were quiet. He worked with machines, collected scrap, and traveled to the nearby settlement for supplies. He was not a man of adventure. His life was simple, and he liked it that way. One evening, the sun was sinking and the sky was turning red. Rian guided his small carrier back from the town. The wind was calm, and the desert seemed endless. He thought of his evening meal and the comfort of rest. Then, without warning, the still sky broke with a flash of light. A streak of fire tore through the clouds and fell fast toward the ground. It was no shooting star. It was too close, too sharp, too real. The object slammed into the desert with a thunderous sound. Dust rose in a wide circle. Rian's carrier shook from the impact, though it was far from the crash. He gripped the controls, eyes wide with shock. His first thought was to turn back. A crash like that could mean danger, but something inside him, a pull he could not name, made him steer toward the smoke. The closer he drove, the stronger the smell of burned air grew. The sand was blackened, glassy in some places from the heat. His carrier stopped at the edge of the crash site. The ground was cracked and glowing faintly. At the center of the crater lay a broken vessel, sleek but ruined, unlike any ship he had seen before. Rian climbed down, his boots sinking slightly in the loose sand. He scanned the wreck carefully. Parts of the craft hissed with steam. Sparks danced along the twisted metal. He expected to find nothing living. Yet as he stepped closer, he heard a faint sound. It was soft, almost like a cry. He froze. The sound came again, weak but clear. Against his better judgment, Rian followed it. He moved around the broken hull until he saw her, a small figure crouched near a shattered panel. She had skin that shimmered faintly like silver under the fading light. Her hair was pale, almost white, and her large eyes glowed softly with fear. She was young, no older than a child. Her hands trembled as she tried to push herself upright. When she saw him, she pulled back quickly, pressing against the metal, as if she thought he might harm her. Rian's heart pounded. He had heard of travelers from other stars. Some were traders, some were wanderers, but rarely did they come this deep into the desert. Never had he seen one so close, and never a child. She looked frightened, lost, and fragile. He raised his hand slowly to show he carried no weapon. His voice was calm, though his heart raced. "I will not hurt you," he said. His words meant nothing to her, he knew, but tone often spoke louder than speech. The girl watched him with wide eyes. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She spoke, but her voice was strange, filled with sounds he could not understand. He shook his head gently. She frowned, then tried again, slower. But still it was foreign to his ears. Rian stepped back slightly, lowering himself to the sand so he did not appear tall or threatening. From his pack, he pulled out a water flask. He opened it and drank first to show its use, then placed it on the ground between them. He pointed at it and slid it toward her. The girl hesitated. Her thin hands reached forward. She lifted the flask, smelled it, then drank. Relief showed on her face. For a moment, her fear softened. Rian smiled a little. It was the first sign that trust could grow. He reached again into his pack and pulled out a small food ration. He unwrapped it, broke it, and set part of it closer to her. She studied him, then the food, and finally ate. Her movements were cautious, but the hunger was real. When she finished, her eyes lifted to his face again. This time she did not shrink back as much. She whispered something in her language. Rian could not answer, but he nodded, placing his hand over his chest. "Rian," he said, slowly and clearly. She tilted her head, repeating the sound in a soft voice. "Rian?" He smiled and pointed at her, waiting. She hesitated, then tapped her chest lightly. Mira. Her name was Mira. It was the first bridge between them. The desert night grew colder as stars began to appear above. Rian knew he could not leave her. She was too weak to survive alone, and he could not abandon a child in such a state. He helped her stand. She leaned on him lightly, her steps unsteady. Together, they moved back to his carrier. She looked at the vehicle with wide eyes, but when he gestured for her to climb in, she obeyed as they rode back toward his home. Myra looked out at the stars. Her eyes reflected the sky with a sadness he could feel even without words. Rian wondered where she had come from and what had brought her here. He also wondered if others would come looking for her, or if danger followed close behind. When they reached his small stone dwelling, Rian guided her inside. The room was simple, with a table, 2 chairs, a sleeping cot, and shelves of tools. Mira looked around with quiet curiosity. Rian gave her a blanket and pointed at the cot. She sat carefully, still watchful, still uncertain, but no longer trembling. That night, Rian sat awake by the table, staring at the quiet form of the alien child who had entered his life by fire and chance. His world had always been the desert, the scrap, the silence. But now, in one evening, everything had changed. He knew nothing of her past, her people, or the dangers that might follow. Yet as he watched her rest, wrapped in his blanket, he felt a strange resolve. She had trusted him, and he would not betray that trust. Outside, the desert stretched silent and endless, the stars burning high. Somewhere out there was the reason Mira had fallen from the sky. Rian did not know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing. His life would never return to its old rhythm. The path before him had shifted, and a new story had begun. The morning sun rose over the desert with a bright fire that painted the sand in gold. Rian was already awake, though he had barely slept. He had spent the night thinking about the strange child who now rested in his small home. The sound of her soft breathing had reminded him many times that she was no dream. She was real, and her presence was going to change everything. When Rian turned, he saw Mira sitting up on the cot. The blanket had slipped to the floor. Her silver-toned skin glowed faintly in the sunlight that came through the cracks of the wall. Her pale hair was tangled, and her large eyes followed him with quiet curiosity. Rian spoke gently. "Good morning," he said. Even though he knew she would not understand the words, Mira tilted her head, studying his mouth as he spoke, then tried to mimic the sound. It came out soft and uneven, but she smiled after making the effort. Rian found himself smiling too. He brought out a ration pack and broke it into 2 pieces. He gave one to Mira and ate the other himself. She watched him chew, then copied his motion. It was clumsy at first, but then she laughed lightly when she managed to eat as he did. The sound was faint, yet it made the room feel warmer. As the morning passed, Rian pulled out one of his old devices, a small translator tool he had once bought from a trader. It was not in good condition, and he had never needed it before, but perhaps it could help them now. He placed it on the table, tapped the switch, and the small screen flickered with light. The device made a humming sound. Myra's eyes widened. She leaned closer, her silver fingers brushing over the tool with gentle care. She touched a button, and the device crackled, then gave out a line of strange sounds. Mira spoke in her own language, soft and clear. The device shook, glitched, then produced a broken translation. Need ... find ... mother. Rian froze. He looked at Mira, who repeated her words carefully. The device translated again, this time clearer. Need to find my mother. The weight of the sentence struck him. She was not only lost, she was searching. Somewhere out there, her mother was missing. Rian leaned back, trying to think. He pointed to Mira. "Mira," he said slowly. Then he touched his chest. "Rian," she nodded, smiling faintly, then placed her hand on her chest. "Mira." She pointed toward the sky outside the window. "Mother." The device caught the word and repeated it with a soft tone. Rian understood enough. Her mother was alive, and Mira was determined to reach her. The translator continued to work, though it broke often and filled some words with static. Rian learned that Myra's ship had been attacked. She and her mother were separated when escape pods launched. Myra's pod had landed in the desert, while her mother's signal had gone far away. Mira had been trying to follow the beacon, but the crash had left her weak. Listening to her, Rian felt a mix of emotions. Fear, because helping her would surely bring trouble if the wrong people discovered her. Curiosity, because he had never been part of anything beyond his small world. And something else too, something stronger. He felt the need to protect her. He looked at Mira seriously and spoke, letting the translator work. "I will help you." The device buzzed, then repeated his words in her language. Mira's eyes filled with relief. She reached out and touched his hand lightly. It was the first time she had touched him without fear. Rian held still, letting her trust grow. That day, Rian prepared for travel. He packed food, water, and tools into the carrier. He repaired the old solar panels and made sure the engine was strong enough for the long journey. Mira followed him around, watching closely. She was small but quick, and she tried to copy his actions. When he carried tools, she carried smaller ones. When he checked the water supply, she tapped the side of the container with her thin fingers, as if confirming it too, though she did not speak his language well yet. They began to form their own way of communication. A nod meant yes. A shake of the head meant no. When she raised her hand in warning, it meant danger. When she pointed to her chest with determination, it meant she wanted to keep going. At midday, Rian took Myra out into the open desert for practice. He wanted her to learn how to signal if they were separated. He drew marks in the sand, teaching her which sign meant stop and which meant safe. Mira learned quickly, copying the shapes with her fingers. At one point she laughed when her line came out crooked. Rian found himself laughing with her. It had been a long time since he had felt this light. As the sun lowered, they climbed into the carrier and drove into the open land. Mira guided him with the faint signal from her small device, pointing whenever the direction shifted. Rian drove carefully, avoiding rocky hills and deep sand. The engine hummed, and the desert wind blew strong against their faces. At night they stopped near an old ruin. The remains of stone walls stood like broken teeth against the sky. They set up a small fire using Rian's portable burner. Mira sat close, her silver skin glowing faintly in the flame. She pulled out a small object from her pocket, something that looked like a crystal shard. It shimmered in her hand as she showed it to Rian through the translator. She explained that it was a memory shard, a piece of her people's knowledge. When she touched it to the firelight, it projected a faint image of stars and lines that marked paths between them. Rian watched with wide eyes. It was a map, a part of the galaxy far larger than he had ever imagined. Mira pointed to one of the glowing lines and then to herself. The device translated, "Mother is there." Rian stared at the stars above and then at the image. He felt small, yet for the first time he felt connected to something much greater. When the night grew colder, Rian gave Myra his spare blanket. She curled up near the fire, her eyes heavy with sleep. Before she closed them, she looked at him and spoke softly through the translator. "You are kind." Rian said nothing at first, surprised by her words. Then he answered with honesty, "You are not alone." She smiled faintly, then drifted to sleep. Rian sat awake for a long time, listening to the wind whisper through the ruins. He knew their path would not be easy. The desert was harsh, and the signal they followed could lead them into danger. But he also knew one thing for certain. The child trusted him now. He had given his word. He would guide her, protect her, help her find her mother no matter the cost. As the stars shone bright above and the fire burned low, Rian felt a strange new strength rising inside him. His life had always been about survival, but now it was about something more. He was no longer just a man of the desert. He was part of a journey that could reach beyond the stars, and he was ready for it. The desert stretched wide and endless as Rian and Mira continued their journey. Days turned into nights, and nights turned back into days. The signal Mira carried was faint but steady, always pointing them toward the same distant direction. Rian drove the carrier over dunes and around cliffs, careful not to damage the engine. Myra sat beside him, eyes fixed on the small device that pulsed with light. Each day, their bond grew stronger. Mira learned more human words through the old translator. She could now say water, food, safe, and danger. She even called his name without help from the machine, her voice soft but clear. Rian, in turn, learned to read her gestures and expressions. She did not need many words to tell him when she was worried or when she felt hope, but their path was not safe. Strange signs appeared in the sand. Tracks that belonged to no trader or traveler. Marks that suggested they were not alone. At first, Rian told himself it was nothing, but soon the truth became clear. Someone was following them. One evening, as the sun sank and the desert sky turned violet, Rian stopped the carrier on high ground. From there, he could see far across the sand. In the distance, lights flickered, too many and too steady to be natural. He narrowed his eyes. Those were machines, moving fast. His heart tightened. Whoever they were tracking Mira. Rian spoke through the translator. Others are near. They follow us. Mira's face turned pale. She touched the small device at her side and spoke in her own tongue. The translator struggled but managed to deliver the words. Mercenaries. They want my mother. They will not stop. The meaning was sharp. These pursuers were not simple wanderers. They were hunters, and Mira was their prey. That night, Rian did not sleep. He set traps around the camp, small alarms made from scrap metal and wire. Mira stayed close, her eyes wide with fear. Rian placed a hand on her shoulder and spoke firmly. We will not be caught. Trust me. The translator repeated his promise, and Mira nodded, though the worry in her gaze remained. The next morning, they left early, pushing the carrier harder across the sand. Rian knew they could not outrun better machines for long. They needed more than speed. They needed to outthink the hunters. By midday, the heat was harsh. Rian guided the carrier toward a canyon where tall stone walls rose on both sides. The path was narrow, dangerous for machines that moved too fast. He slowed and listened carefully. The sound of engines echoed behind them. The mercenaries were close. Rian turned to Mira. Hold tight. Press the controls, steering the carrier into the canyon at sharp angles. The walls rushed past. Dust filled the air. Behind them, the sound of other engines grew louder. Mira clutched the seat, her eyes fixed on Rian with fear and faith. The hunters came fast. Their vehicles were larger, armed with mounted lights and strange weapons. Bolts of energy struck the canyon walls, breaking rock and sending shards into the air. Rian swerved, avoiding each blast with desperate skill. His hands were steady, but his heart beat fast. He remembered every corner of the desert he had traveled in his life. Every path, every hidden turn. Knowledge of the land was his weapon. He led the chase deeper into the canyon, then suddenly turned into a side passage almost invisible from the main track. The carrier scraped the stone as it entered, but it fit. The hunters, too large, roared past without seeing. Rian held the carrier still, his breath loud in the silence. Mira gripped his arm. For a long moment they waited. The engines of the mercenaries faded farther down the canyon. Only then did Rian move again, guiding the carrier out of the narrow gap and back onto open ground. Mira exhaled in relief. Through the translator she whispered, "You are clever." Rian smiled faintly, though his chest was still tight. "We were lucky," he said, but he knew luck would not hold forever. The mercenaries would search again. They would not give up. As the days went on, the chase continued. Sometimes they saw lights in the distance. Sometimes the hum of engines drifted across the night. Once, a drone passed overhead, scanning the desert. Rian covered Mira with blankets and metal sheets, hiding her heat from its sensors. When it moved on, Mira looked at him with gratitude so deep it needed no words. Through it all, Mira began to admire the way humans survived. She saw how Rian fixed the engine with nothing but spare wire and broken tools. She saw how he read the wind to know if a storm was coming. She saw how he could create traps with scraps of metal and rope. Her people had great machines and advanced knowledge. But here in the harsh desert, it was Rian's simple skills that kept them alive. One evening, while they rested near a dry ravine, Mira spoke softly into the translator. "My people do not know humans well. They think humans are weak, but you are not weak. You fight with the world itself." Rian did not know what to say. He only looked at her, surprised by the respect in her eyes. For years he had lived quietly, fixing old machines and surviving day by day. Now, in her words, he felt a strength he had never claimed for himself. The bond between them grew deeper. Mira trusted him fully. She no longer feared the nights, for she knew he would keep watch. She no longer worried when the mercenaries appeared, for she believed Rian would always find a way. But Rian knew that danger was not ending. The closer they came to Mira's signal, the more desperate their hunters would become. One night, as they set camp in a rocky valley, Rian heard footsteps outside the circle of stones. His traps rattled, sending a sharp noise into the air. He jumped to his feet with a tool in his hand, ready for defense. Mira woke quickly, fear in her eyes. From the shadows stepped a small scouting machine, its red eye glowing. It was no larger than a dog, but it carried a weapon fixed on its side. It scanned the camp, its eye landing on Myra. The hum of energy grew as it charged to fire. Rian acted fast. He grabbed a metal rod from the fire and threw it with all his strength. The rod struck the drone's side, making it spark. The machine turned toward him, but before it could shoot, Rian leaped forward, swinging another piece of scrap with both hands. He smashed the drone against the stone wall until it broke apart. Sparks lit the dark. The machine collapsed, lifeless. Mira ran to him, her small hands grabbing his arm. Through the translator, her words shook with fear. "They know. They are close." Rian nodded, breathing heavy. He looked at the broken drone and knew she was right. The hunters were near, and they would come in greater numbers soon. The next morning, Rian packed quickly. There was no time to waste. The signal Mira carried was stronger now, which meant her mother was closer. But so were the mercenaries. As the carrier sped across the desert, Mira sat beside him, her face filled with both hope and worry. She clutched the memory shard in her hands, whispering to herself in her own tongue. Rian glanced at her and then at the horizon. He had promised to protect her. He had promised to help her find her mother. The path was harder than anything he had faced. Yet he would not break his word. The hunters could chase them, and danger could rise from every shadow, but Rian was ready. He was only one man of the desert, but he carried with him something greater than fear. He carried the trust of a child who believed in him, and that trust gave him strength to face whatever came next. The sun rose pale over the desert, casting long shadows across the sand dunes. Rian drove the carrier steadily, his eyes focused on the horizon. Mira sat beside him, holding the memory shard close to her chest. The small device pulsed more strongly now, and the energy that came from it seemed almost alive. Each pulse told them they were getting closer. For days they had traveled without rest, crossing dry riverbeds, rocky hills, and endless sands. The desert had tested them with storms of dust and wind that tried to push them off course. But Rian had guided them through every obstacle, using his knowledge of the land and his quick thinking. Mira had watched him, learning. She had seen how humans survived, how they could turn simple tools into powerful solutions. Finally, the signal led them to a hidden canyon far from the open desert. The walls rose like great cliffs on either side, shaded from the midday sun. Rian parked the carrier behind a cluster of rocks that would hide them from view. He looked at Mira, who was tense with excitement and fear. "This is it," he said. "Stay close. We do not know what we will find." Mira nodded, her small hand resting on his arm. The translator hummed as she whispered words he could not fully understand. Her eyes shone with hope. She pointed toward the base at the far end of the canyon. A structure made of metal and glass, glowing faintly in the desert light. Rian studied the building. It looked like a research station, fortified with walls and sensors. From the distance, he could see movement. Guards or machines patrolled the perimeter. These were not ordinary mercenaries. They were well-trained, well-armed, and ready for conflict. He knelt beside Mira and whispered, "We need a plan. We go in carefully. No sudden moves." Mira nodded again, holding the memory shard. The shard projected faint maps, showing entry points and corridors inside the base. Using these, Rian and Mira began their approach. They crawled through the rocks, moving silently. Every step was cautious, every sound measured. When they reached the edge of the compound, Rian used a small device from his pack. It was an old signal jammer he had repaired for emergencies. He activated it, sending a pulse that temporarily disabled some of the sensors. The lights flickered, and the guards paused. It was enough. Mira pointed to a side door. "There," the translator said. "Mother is there." Rian nodded. He moved the carrier a short distance closer to the wall. Then he found a small hatch hidden behind debris. It led into a maintenance corridor. He opened it quietly, letting Mira slip in first. She moved carefully, guided by the memory shard. Her small size allowed her to avoid cameras and patrols. Inside, corridors were dimly lit. Strange machines lined the walls, humming with energy. Rian followed, listening for any sign of danger. Mira led the way, pointing where to turn, where to hide, where to move fast. At last they reached a heavy door marked with alien symbols. Mira touched the symbols with her fingers. The translator buzzed, giving a rough translation. "Mother inside. Locked. Only override will open." Rian studied the lock. It was a complex mechanism with alien technology he did not fully understand, but he did understand improvisation. Using small tools from his pack, he carefully examined the system. Sparks flew, wires shifted, and after 10 minutes, the door clicked. It opened slightly enough to slip through. Mira ran inside, her small form almost flying. Rian followed, his eyes scanning every corner. The room beyond was large and bright, filled with equipment and machines he had never seen. And there, in the center, was her mother. Saren, the scientist, sat restrained. But her eyes lit up when she saw Mira. Mira ran to her and the translator repeated her words. "Mother, I found you." Saren's voice cracked with emotion. "Mira, my daughter." They embraced a moment filled with relief and joy. Rian watched quietly, letting them have their reunion. He had done what he had promised, and now the result was more powerful than he could have imagined. But the danger was not over. Alarms suddenly sounded. The mercenaries had noticed the jamming pulse and were moving in fast. Rian grabbed Mira's hand. "We need to move," he said firmly. Sarah nodded. "There is a secondary exit." "Follow me." They ran through winding corridors, avoiding sensors and patrolling guards. Mira clutched her mother's hand while Rian carried a small bag of tools he had packed. The base was larger than he realized, but Rian's careful observation and Mira's memory shard guided them through. At one point, encountered a patrol of 2 guards. Rian froze, then whispered to Myra and Saren. They pressed against the wall as he quietly tossed a small device from his pack. It exploded softly, creating smoke that blinded the guard's sensors. Rian and the women slipped past unnoticed. Finally, they reached a large exit leading to an open courtyard. Outside, the desert sun burned bright. They could see the edge of the canyon where Rian had parked the carrier. But the courtyard was open and exposed. Rian turned to Saren. "We must run fast." "No hesitation," Saren nodded. Myra's small hand gripped his tightly. Together, they dashed across the open space. Behind them, the mercenaries shouted and weapons glinted in the sunlight. Rian felt the rush of fear and adrenaline, but he did not falter. He pushed the carrier forward, holding the door open for them to climb in. Once inside, they started the engine. Myra helped Saran into the seat beside Rian. The carrier roared as it moved across the desert. The mercenaries fired behind them, bolts of energy striking the sand and rocks. But Rian drove with skill, dodging each attack. The chase was intense, but Rian knew the desert well. He led them into narrow paths in dry riverbeds where larger machines could not follow. The mercenaries struggled to keep up their weapons, unable to reach them through twists and rocks. Rian pushed the carrier to its limits, and finally the pursuers fell back, unable to continue. Mira hugged her mother tightly. The translator repeated her words. "Safe. We are safe." Saren turned to Rian, her eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "You saved my daughter's life. You have my thanks, and more. Without you, we would have been lost." Rian shook his head. "I only did what I promised. She trusted me. I could not fail her." Mira looked at him with admiration. "You are brave," she said. "You are strong. My people will never forget you." For a moment, the 3 of them sat in the carrier, looking out at the desert. The wind blew, carrying the scent of sand and stone. The sun was high, but the danger felt far away now. They had achieved what seemed impossible. Mira was reunited with her mother, and the mercenaries were behind them. But Rian knew that the journey was not over. This reunion was only one step. The knowledge Saren carried was valuable, and others might still come for it. Yet in this moment, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. They had faced fear, danger, and the unknown, and together they had prevailed. Mira rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Saren placed a hand over hers, her grip firm and loving. Rian watched quietly. He had joined a world larger than he had ever imagined, a world where humans and alien knowledge could meet, and where courage and compassion could change everything. The desert stretched endless before them, but now it felt like a place of opportunity. The stars above promised journeys beyond imagination, and Rian felt a new strength within himself. He had helped a lost alien girl find her mother, and in doing so, he had discovered the power of trust, the meaning of bravery, and the beginning of a path that would take him far beyond the quiet life he had known. The desert stretched wide and bright under the morning sun. Rian, Myra, and her mother, Saren, had found a safe place for now, but the knowledge of danger remained. The mercenaries who had attacked them were still out there somewhere, and the information Saren carried was valuable beyond measure. Rian knew their journey was not over, but for the first time, he felt a sense of accomplishment that went deeper than anything he had ever known. Saren studied the horizon. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, reflected years of experience and wisdom. "We cannot stay here long," she said. "There are others who will come for this knowledge. We need to move, but first I must thank you, Rian. You have done more than any human I have ever known."
Ow.
Rian shook his head. "I only did what I promised. Mira trusted me, and I could not let her down." Mira looked up at him, her silver eyes shining with admiration. "You are brave, Rian. You saved my mother. You saved me. I will never forget you." The words made Rian feel something he had never felt before. He had always lived quietly, thinking his life was small and unimportant. But now he realized that even one person could change the course of events. Even one person could make a difference in the lives of others. Saren approached him with a small device in her hand. "This is a tracker and communicator. It will allow us to travel faster and stay connected, even across great distances. With it, you can join us if you wish." Rian took the device, examining it carefully. He felt its weight in his hands, a promise of new possibilities. He looked at Myra and Saren, then at the desert around them. His old life had been simple, safe, and predictable. But now, the world was larger, full of challenges, discoveries, and adventure. I want to help," Rian said finally. "If you are heading into danger, I want to be there. I want to protect her," he pointed to Mira, "and I want to learn to see more of the world beyond this desert." Mira smiled, a bright and innocent expression that lit up her face. "You will see wonders you cannot imagine," she said. The translator repeated her words, but Rian did not need it to understand. He could feel the truth in her tone. Saren nodded, her face serious but kind. "Then you will come with us. Humanity has shown courage and creativity, Rian. You have proved both. You can help bridge the gap between our worlds. Together, we can face what is to come." That afternoon, they prepared to leave. Rian had repaired the carrier, making it strong enough for the journey. Mira helped him pack supplies, her small hands surprisingly steady and careful. Saren checked the memory shard and the small communicator. The desert was quiet, but the wind carried a sense of change, as if the world itself knew something important was about to happen. As they moved through the dunes, Rian felt the excitement of the unknown. He had never been beyond this part of the desert. He had never imagined leaving his small settlement. Yet now, with Mira beside him and her mother guiding the way, he felt ready for anything. During the journey, Rian observed Mira closely. She was not only intelligent but also brave. She learned quickly and trusted her instincts. Her understanding of alien technology amazed him. She could manipulate devices and predict their behavior in ways he could barely imagine. and she had learned from him too. Adapting to human methods and creativity, Saren spoke to him quietly one evening as they rested near a canyon. "Rian, you have a rare quality. Most humans survive by chance or luck. You survive because you think, because you care, because you will not abandon someone in need. That is why you are here with us." Rian felt a warmth in his chest. He had never been praised like this. He had never been recognized for what he did every day, surviving and helping where he could. Now, he realized that courage was not just about facing danger, but also about choosing to care, to act even when the outcome is uncertain. As days passed, the desert began to feel smaller, almost familiar. Rian guided the carrier through hidden passes, avoiding areas that could attract attention. The memory shards showed them paths that were safe and signs of life where they could rest. Mira and her mother shared stories of their people, of worlds beyond the stars, of technologies and cultures that Rian had never dreamed of for Rian. Every story, every piece of knowledge was a window into a larger universe. He began to understand that humans had much to offer. Their ingenuity, their resilience, their ability to adapt. These were strengths that could make a difference in conflicts far larger than any one person or planet. One night, as they rested under the stars, Mira whispered to him, "Rian, when we return home, you will see the galaxy in ways no human has before. You will meet others like me, and they will know your courage." Rian looked at her small face, illuminated by starlight. He realized that his life had already changed forever. The quiet days of working alone in the desert were behind him. He had stepped into a story much larger than himself, a story that would reach across worlds and touch the lives of many. The next morning, the carrier moved swiftly across a rocky plateau. Mira guided them, pointing out landmarks that indicated they were nearing the edge of the desert. Beyond it, there were larger settlements, trade stations, and eventually, the ships that would take them into space. Rian's heart pounded with anticipation. When they reached the outskirts of a larger settlement, Saren paused. "This is where we will prepare for our next journey," she said. "We will need more supplies and allies. The universe is vast, and there will be challenges. But with you, Rian, we have hope." Rian looked around at the settlement, people moving about, trading goods, working on machines. He felt a connection to them, knowing that humans could survive, adapt, and rise to challenges anywhere. He also realized that his courage, combined with the trust of others, could make him part of something truly extraordinary as the sun set. Painting the sky with colors of fire and gold, Rian stood beside Mira and Saren. The wind carried the scent of the desert and the distant stars. He looked up at the sky, imagining the worlds he had never seen, the adventures that awaited, and the possibilities that lay ahead. Saren placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your life will never be the same, Rian. You have chosen a path that will take you far beyond this world. But you are ready. You have proven yourself." Rian nodded. He looked at Mira, smiling faintly. "I am ready," he said. "I will not stop. I will protect her. I will learn. And I will see the worlds beyond this desert." Mira smiled back. "And I will be with you." Together, they prepared for the journey ahead. The carrier hummed with energy, the memory shard pulsed softly, and the desert faded behind them. Ahead lay the unknown, a universe filled with wonders, dangers, and challenges. But Rian felt no fear. He had courage, he had trust, and he had the chance to make a difference. As the carrier lifted from the desert floor, Rian looked back one last time. His home, the small settlement, and the quiet life he had known were behind him. The stars awaited, and with Mira and her mother by his side, he would face the adventures that lay ahead. For the first time, Rian understood what it meant to be truly alive. He had chosen a path of courage, compassion, and discovery. The universe was vast, and he was ready to rise to meet it. The journey of one man, a lost alien girl, and her mother had begun. Together, they would travel through worlds unknown, face challenges unimaginable, and prove that humanity's strength was more than survival. It was courage, creativity, and the willingness to help those in need. And Rian knew, without doubt, that his life would never be the same again.